Alright, what's up fellas? I wanted to make a video going over my current diet. I did one of those a while ago. It has changed since, so I figured I'd make a video detailing my diet and rationale for some of the choices I make in there. Hopefully there's something you can take away from it if I explain what I'm doing well. And I've been putting off making this video because I keep thinking I need to film my food and I keep forgetting to film my breakfast, and I realized that's really not very important. What matters is explaining the choices I make and walking you through it, and you don't really need to look at a bunch of bowls filled with meat and rice. So just kind of starting from the top down, I think it's good to pick yourself a couple of protein sources, a couple of carb sources, and a couple of fat sources, all of which the quality matters, the micronutrient density matters, but one of the big deciding factors in picking those is going to be how they digest, right? So, for example, I'm limited to just about only rice and rice derivatives for my carbs, because any other carb source in any reasonable quantity that I would eat it is going to upset my stomach. I can't use traditional things like oats or pasta or even potatoes in any quantity that would be worth eating are going to upset my stomach, right? So I'm going to be forced to get the majority of my carbohydrates from rice. There's going to be certain amounts coming from fruit in my diet, but as far as running up the carbohydrate allowance that I want, I'm going to be limited to rice. You're not necessarily going to be limited to that, so it is digestion dependent. Potatoes are really good to fit in there, maybe a potato meal, maybe a little bit of potato with 2 or 3 meals. If the quantity is the issue, you can space it through the day. It's kind of like dairy. Just because you can't eat 100% of your calcium in Greek yogurt in one sitting doesn't mean that it's not a valid option. If you break it up into 3 smaller boluses, right, it's going to elicit less of an effect. So, not whatever, 60-70% of the population is lactose intolerant to a whole glass of milk. A lower percentage is going to be lactose intolerant to something with a lower quantity of lactose, such as Greek yogurt, and then something with even less lactose, like a hard cheese. All of these are good ways to get your calcium in, but if you can't get your calcium from those, because you're really truly lactose intolerant, powdered eggshells is valid. But as far as carbohydrates, that's what I'm limited to. As far as fat sources go, I'll source some of my fat from red meat. I'll usually choose something leaner, like 90-10 ground beef. I'm not wealthy enough to be eating steaks on a regular basis, so but the nice part about that 10% fat of the 90-10 beef is half of that is monounsaturated fat, so it's all right. The other half is saturated fat, which we probably should limit. Based on the research that I've read, is probably not the #1 leading indicator for heart disease, but it's not something we should be running up a ridiculous amount of, right? So my first fat source is going to be coming from, also a really good fat source is is egg yolks. I can't eat those, so that's removed from my list of potential fat sources. They've got the amount coming from my leaner ground beef, and then I've got a certain amount coming from chicken, because chicken does have fat. And then to supplement that, to get up to my target macro, the other fat source that I have the most luck with is olive oil. It seems to burn really clean. It seems to slow down my digestion in a good way, so I get a prolonged insulin response. So I used to eat chicken and rice before I trained, and I would always have to go to the bathroom in the middle of training, and then I added in a tablespoon of olive oil to make that a more gradual digestion, and then I felt great. And I also wouldn't crash for the second half of the workout because the digestion of those carbohydrates is then prolonged. It's the reason they've actually discarded the glycemic index, because all of those numbers are assuming you're ingesting nothing but that carbohydrate source. So when you add in proteins and fats, it's going to delay the digestion regardless of what the carb source is. So like the American Diabetic Association has disregarded it, right? So we can take that away from informing our choices about our carb sources. So, historically people might say white rice is bad. I think it digests well, and you can use your protein and your fats to delay the digestion, decrease the insulin spike. So, there's no downside to it in that regard. People might say, oh, well, white rice isn't micronutrient dense. Well, there's brown rice, the amount of micronutrients is still so small that if that's where you're trying to source your micronutrients, it's not worthwhile anyway. So that's just not where I'm looking to. So as far as fat sources, I'm getting a certain amount from my meats, and then I run up the rest in olive oil, just because it sits really easy. It's a good source, and it's probably heart healthy. Avocado is good, but I tend to burn out on it really quick, so that's more of a psychological thing. For some reason, I'll eat it for a couple of days, think it's great, and then suddenly it's gross to me. But that's also a carb, so that's a fat source that works really well for me. And then as far as sourcing my proteins, let's see, eggs are off the table. I'm gonna eat red meat because it doesn't upset my stomach, and it's got a much higher micronutrient density, so it's a very good investment and good use of those calories. So I eat a reasonable amount of lean ground beef. And then I also supplement with chicken just because it's really easy for me to put down. I've been eating so much chicken for so long that it's very easy for me to force down a bunch of chicken. Aside from that, I have a scoop of casein before bed. That's just because maybe I can get like 1% better by ingesting that slow digesting protein before I go to bed. But that's where most of my protein is coming from, and it's also coming from kefir, which is added into it's basically just like drinkable yogurt. I got lots of good probiotics, but the main reason I drink it is it's just a very convenient way to run up calcium. 3 cups of kefir per day, broken into 3 1-cup shakes, is enough to get me my 1 gram of calcium per day, pretty comfortably. And because it's a liquid and I can drink it, it's very easy, and it doesn't hurt my stomach as long as I break it up into 3 separate ingestions rather than 1. So that's my sourcing, and then I've got a couple of things I add in for different nutritional demands. So kind of went through what my food selection is, and you can do that for yourself. You say, okay, I know these protein sources work for me, these carb sources work for me, and these fat sources work for me. And then doing if it fits your macros within that selected list is a lot more effective, because if it fits your macros, but you can select things with high micronutrient density, and you can select things that digest well for you. So if you want to switch your beef for chicken one meal, you're totally allowed to, and it's probably better than trying to awkwardly source everything from Pop-Tarts like a lot of people end up doing, and missing out on a lot of the major micronutrients. So this pre-selected list, if it fits your macros, is a kind of flexible dieting that I think could be a lot more mentally sustainable for people, as well as really maximize their results. It's not what I do. I eat the same thing every day, which I'm about to go through, but I'm just kind of providing what I would say my rationales and how I walk someone else through building a diet. Is first, you're going to select those sources, then you can start working out appropriate macros, maybe start at 1 gram per pound of body weight for protein, 0.3 to 0.5 grams of fat per pound of body weight, and then fill the rest of your caloric allotment in carbs. The best way to figure out how many calories you burn on a given day, the calculators can be good for an initial estimate. Obviously, they're not perfectly accurate. The most accurate thing you can do is to eat exactly how you normally eat, and track for a week and weigh yourself every morning. And if your weight doesn't change across that week, the average calories you intook across that week, so you just take all of your daily tracked calories, add them all up, divide by 7, whatever that average was. If your body weight didn't change much at all, then that is where you're starting at. That's your starting estimate of your caloric expenditure. And then you can use those food sources to, fiddle with them. You can substitute one thing for another, and then hit your macros with that. What I do, I eat the same thing every day, just so I can predictably know, okay, this is when I'm going to feel the most fueled for training. I know how I feel after any combination of food, and it's the same thing every day. That way I can trial and error and really optimize stuff. So in the morning, I wake up and I have 1 cup of uncooked rice, cooked, right? So I don't eat it uncooked, but I weigh it uncooked. A tip I picked up from Evan Centropani, that's generally good advice that I do violate in a moment here, is that when you're weighing food, you should always weigh it in the driest state, right? Because if the state that it has the least water has the least variability, right? So something like oats or rice, you're going to weigh in a dry state, and then something like beef or chicken, you're going to weigh in a cooked state. Especially chicken, they tend to like inject a bunch of water into it to inflate the weight, so that way the same chicken breast weighs more, even though it's just water, and they can charge you more for it. And then you'll notice that it'll cook down, especially these cheap chicken breasts, they really inflate. So I would always weigh my chicken post-cooking. Beef, they don't fill it with water, so it doesn't make as big of a difference. So because I like cooking my beef fresh, I will weigh it raw, just my personal preference. But in the morning, I will have 1 cup of rice, uncooked, then cook it. I will have a cup of bone broth with that, just because bone broth or chicken broth makes it easier to eat large quantities of rice if you make it into a soup, jacked from Stan Efferding like everything else I do. Just makes it easy to eat the quantities that I need to eat. I add 1 gram of sodium. Important to note that I'm saying 1 gram of sodium, not 1 gram of salt. Salt is NaCl, right? So it's sodium chloride. That means half, if not maybe a little bit more. I don't know the molecular weights, but some percentage of the weight of the salt is going to be chloride, which we don't want. We want the sodium. So the easiest way to do that is just use a 1/4 tablespoon, 2/4 tablespoons of most salt is going to be. You can look at the label, and you're going to want to measure it like volumetrically and to calculate the amount of sodium you're getting. That way, it's usually a little bit better than weighing it because most food scales aren't as precise as you probably need for that. And then I have 8.5 ounces of lean ground beef cooked, mixed into that all at one. And then I also have a shake comprised of 1 cup of kefir, which is how I'm going to be sourcing my calcium. I have half a cup of orange juice, just because daily ingestions of fructose through the day can positively stimulate your liver and help with your liver enzymes. It's also a good sourcing of vitamin C. Obviously with the red meat we're getting zinc, iron, and the vitamin B complex, which is an easy way to source that. And then I used to put spinach, 2 large handfuls of spinach into this shake, and I found that the amount of oxalates in the spinach was upsetting my stomach. Even if I steamed the spinach, which reduces that, it would still be too much and it would upset my stomach and cause loose stool, which is no fun. So what I did is I actually switched the spinach, which was primarily just an additional potassium source, though we're getting a lot of good potassium, a bit from the red meat, but a lot from the kefir. Sometimes I'll have Greek yogurt instead of kefir. That also is a very good source of potassium, and that's really running up my potassium during the day, because 5 grams of potassium is what you're supposed to get, and that can be rather difficult if you're not going out of your way to ingest fruit. And because the spinach was primarily, among other micronutrients, but it was primarily for the potassium, what I did is I switched it for berries, which are also a very good source of potassium. I'll rotate between blueberries, blackberries, and strawberries. They have a host of other micronutrients within them, but the biggest thing I'm sourcing is maybe a little bit of fiber and the potassium, right? So that would be my meal 1, and then I throw 2 scoops of beetroot powder for the nitrates for blood pressure management into that shake, and then I go to the gym. While I'm training, I have my intra-workout concoction, which is comprised of 2 cups of cranberry juice, which is my sourcing for my iodine, but it's also a sourcing for intra-workout fructose. I think it's good to ingest 2 different carbohydrate sources while you train, because the uptake pathways for those 2 different carbohydrate sources are different. So if you have, let's just say, dextrose and fructose, your rate of uptake is going to be twice as much as if you only had 1 sourcing. So what I'll have is I'll have cranberry juice for fructose, and then I'll add some dextrose to it to add a second carbohydrate source, so I can have double the rate of uptake. I put half a gram of sodium in there to replace sodium as it's excreted while I train. I put creatine in there to increase water retention, as well as just get my daily creatine that maybe I'm not topping off with the red meat that I eat. And then I'm putting essential amino acids, which is, kind of a debatable thing. John Meadows swears by it, and I take John Meadows' word like for just about anything. He's a very smart guy with a lot of first-hand experience, and he swears that intra-workout supplementation of EAAs paired with carbohydrates, so that you're, in your bloodstream you have essential amino acids, and then you're using a fast digesting carbohydrate to shuttle those essential amino acids to the muscles. He swears by it, says it makes measurable difference in recovery. I haven't noticed it myself, but I'm rocking with it because I'm trying to optimize everything, not just do okay. So that's my intra-workout drink, getting some amount of calories from the dextrose and the cranberry juice, fuel some long training sessions, because sometimes my workload is pretty big and it takes me a while, even if I'm pacing myself pretty well. Immediately after training, I will have another cup of uncooked rice cooked, 1 tablespoon of olive oil, and then 8.5 grams of cooked chicken. No micronutrient sources, just because it's maybe suboptimal to have those right after training. A lot of people would say, well, why are you having a fat source with your post-training meal? Don't you want that to digest as quick as possible? Wouldn't you want to not slow down the digestion? I would say that yes, if it didn't upset my stomach to have a meal with really, really low fat, so I had the fat source. All right, after that meal, I will go for a walk just to get my digestion going a little bit quicker. That way I can eat again. In 2 hours, I space 3 or 4 walks throughout the day to try to get my 10,000 steps so I can maintain a consistent NEAT. Generally keeps me feeling pretty good. Not part of my diet, but worth mentioning. And then the benefit to taking some of those walks after a meal is you're going to be hungry again sooner because it's going to stimulate your digestion a little bit better. Walking, gravity, all works really well to push food through you. Then my fourth meal of the day, my third meal, that's what it is. Or my third meal, which is basically a duplicate of the first meal. I've got that 8.5 ounces of uncooked red meat, lean red meat. I have the 1 cup of rice cooked. I have the 1 cup of bone broth, and then I have the same shake again. Just kind of breaking up another intaking of fructose to stimulate the liver, another third of my calcium intake for the day, another large amount of potassium. That way it's not all at once, it doesn't make me sick. Basically just a repeat of the first meal as far as the solids. Meal 4 looks like something like that, except switching out the red meat for salmon. That way I'm getting my omega-3s in from a whole food source that also has more potassium. Other than that, it looks the same. I have the same shake again with the beetroot powder, the blackberries, the orange juice, and the kefir. I have the rice. I got the sodium. Oh, and then because the salmon doesn't have enough fat to hit my macros, I add another tablespoon of fat to that meal. And that brings me, and then I have 4 baby carrots with that meal, and meal 3 and meal 5. Meal 5, basically a duplicate of meals 1 and 3, right? I have red meat, I've got rice, I've got bone broth, I've got carrots, I've got and a casein shake that I have before I go to bed. That's not a big deal. Don't copy that. It's just me trying to pick up like maybe 0.5%, and I really haven't noticed anything. As far as my macros go, I don't know what they are off the top of my head because I initially crafted the diet, calculated my macros, and then any adjustments I've made since then have been via food quantities, not necessarily the macros. So when I was able to eat the food comfortably, I added in another ounce of red meat to each red meat meal. I added another ounce of chicken. I added a little bit of rice, and I don't know exactly. That's just kind of how I modulate things once I set those initial macros. If I were to take a guess off the top of my head from all sources, we're probably looking at about 300 grams of protein, 80 grams of fat, and bunch carbs. I really don't know off the top of my head from all sources, but that's what I'm eating right now. If you guys have any questions or any other videos you would like me to make, leave them in the comments of this video. I apologize for being a sweaty mess. I got back from the gym and it's very hot and I can't run my fan while I'm making these. But I hope you enjoyed these. I know it's a little bit boring. I didn't really have anything to show you, but figured it would be good to update you guys on what I'm eating.